Prohibition, Why America Banned Alcohol, and Why It Backfired Spectacularly. January 17th, 1920. At the stroke of midnight, the United States of America went dry. The manufacture, sale, and transportation of alcohol became illegal. The people who passed this law called it a noble experiment, a moral triumph, the dawn of a better, cleaner America. What they got instead was Al Capone, was over 30,000 speakeasies in New York City alone, was the birth of the American Mafia, was a government so corrupt that police officers across the country were on the payroll of gangsters, was poisoned alcohol that killed over 10,000 Americans, and was 13 years of absolute, spectacular, catastrophic failure that permanently changed America in ways nobody intended and nobody expected. This is Hidden America TV. This is the real story of Prohibition, and it is wilder than anything Hollywood ever put on screen. Segment 1. How it happened to understand Prohibition. You have to understand what came before it. In the 1800s, America had a drinking problem, a serious one. The average American drank roughly 3 times as much alcohol per year as Americans do today. Saloons were everywhere, on every corner, in every neighborhood, and they were almost exclusively male spaces. While men drank, families suffered. Wages disappeared into saloon registers. Domestic violence spiked on payday. Children went hungry. Women in particular had had enough. The temperance movement, led largely by women who had no right to vote but plenty of moral authority, began building political pressure across the country for decades. Groups like the Women's Christian Temperance Union and the Anti-Saloon League became extraordinarily powerful political forces. And then came World War I. The war gave prohibitionists 2 powerful new arguments. First, most of America's major breweries were owned by German-American families. With America at war with Germany, supporting the beer industry started to feel uncomfortably like supporting the enemy. Second, grain was needed for the war effort. Every bushel used for alcohol was a bushel not feeding soldiers. The political stars aligned. The 18th Amendment to the Constitution, banning the manufacture, sale, and transportation of intoxicating liquors, passed with a 68% supermajority in the House and 76% support in the Senate. 46 of 48 states ratified it. On January 17, 1920, America went dry, and immediately, absolutely nothing went according to plan. Segment 2. The Speakeasies. The law went into effect on a Monday. By Wednesday, bootleggers were already in business. Americans did not stop drinking. They just got creative about where. Within months of Prohibition beginning, the saloon was replaced by the speakeasy, named for the way you had to whisper the password at the door so as not to be overheard. Speakeasies spread across America like wildfire. In New York City alone, estimates suggest there were over 30,000 operating by the late 1920s, twice the number of legal bars that had existed before. These weren't just dingy backroom operations. The most famous speakeasies were glamorous. Jazz music to dance floors, chandeliers, celebrity guests, the best food in the city. The famous 21 Club in Manhattan had a secret wine cellar behind a hidden wall. A specially designed system could dump thousands of bottles of liquor down a drain the moment a federal raid began. The Stock Exchange bar had a trap door through which bartenders could vanish with the evidence in seconds. Some speakeasies required membership cards. Others required you to know a specific knock or whisper a specific phrase. And some you could find if you just looked for a door painted green. In Chicago, New York, Detroit, and every major American city, speakeasies became the social center of 1920s life. They did something the old saloons never had. They welcomed women. For the first time in American history, women were drinking in public alongside men, not because the law allowed it, but because the law no longer applied. Prohibition, designed to clean up America's morals, accidentally liberated an entire generation of American women from the strictest social codes of the Victorian era. Segment 3. Al Capone and the Birth of the Mob. Here is the single greatest unintended consequence of Prohibition. It created the American Mafia. Before 1920, organized crime existed, but it was small-scale, fragmented, operating in the shadows at the edges of cities. Prohibition handed criminal organizations the most lucrative business opportunity in American history. Someone had to make the alcohol. Someone had to move it. Someone had to distribute it to 30,000 speakeasies in New York and thousands more across the country. That someone was organized crime. And no one understood the opportunity faster than a 23-year-old from Brooklyn named Alphonse Capone. Al Capone moved to Chicago in 1919. By the late 1920s, he controlled an empire. He owned breweries. He owned distilleries. He controlled the supply chain for bootleg liquor from Canada to Cuba. He owned hundreds of speakeasies. He had judges, politicians, and police officers on his personal payroll. And he was making, according to estimates, $60 million a year in 1920s money. That is the equivalent of well over $1 billion in today's economy from selling illegal beer. But Capone's empire wasn't built without extreme violence. Rival gangs competed for territory. Bootlegging routes were worth millions, and the men who controlled them defended them with bullets. By the late 1920s, Chicago authorities reported up to 400 gangland murders per year. It culminated in the event that shocked the entire nation. February 14th, 1999, Valentine's Day. 7 members of the rival Bugs Moran gang were lined up against a wall in a Chicago garage by men dressed as police officers and executed. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre became a symbol of everything Prohibition had created. A country so corrupted by illegal money that gangsters dressed as cops to commit mass murder in broad daylight. The public had seen enough, but it would take 4 more years before Congress finally acted. Segment 4. The government poisoned people. Here is the darkest chapter of Prohibition, and the one almost nobody talks about. The United States government deliberately poisoned its own citizens. Here's how bootleggers had a problem. The government allowed industrial alcohol, used in factories, cleaning products, and fuel, to be manufactured legally. Bootleggers were stealing and reselling it as drinking alcohol. So in 1926, the government ordered all industrial alcohol to be laced with toxic chemicals, including methanol, kerosene, and chloroform. The idea was to make the stolen alcohol too dangerous to drink. What happened instead was a catastrophe. Bootleggers were already selling the industrial alcohol. Now it was poison. But they kept selling it anyway, because their customers didn't know. The death toll was staggering. By 1933, it is estimated that the government's deliberate poisoning program killed over 10,000 Americans. Tens of thousands more were blinded or suffered permanent neurological damage. New York City's chief medical examiner at the time publicly condemned the program, saying it was the government's decision to murder its own citizens in the name of enforcing a law. Federal officials defended the policy. They argued that people who drank illegal alcohol were knowingly breaking the law and bore responsibility for the consequences. This is not a conspiracy theory. It is documented government policy, and it is one of the most disturbing chapters in American legal history. Segment 5. Corruption everywhere. Here's a question nobody asks about Prohibition. If there were 30,000 speakeasies in New York City, where were the police? The answer is, many of them were inside the speakeasies, drinking or taking envelopes of cash. Corruption during Prohibition reached a level that had never been seen in America before. Federal Prohibition agents were paid less than $2,000 a year. Al Capone was making $60 million. The math was simple. Speakeasy owners paid off beat cops to look the other way. Bootleggers paid off judges to dismiss cases. Mob bosses paid off city officials to ensure their operations were protected. The New York City Police Commissioner himself admitted in 1923 that prohibition laws had neither the support nor the respect of the public, and that the department's efforts to enforce them were met with obstruction on every hand. In some cities, the corruption ran so deep that the only people actually enforcing prohibition were a small number of underpaid federal agents who were outnumbered, outgunned, and working against their own police departments. The most famous was Eliot Ness, the young Treasury agent who assembled a team of incorruptible investigators specifically because every other law enforcement channel in Chicago had been bought. He became famous. He became a TV show, a movie. But for every Eliot Ness, there were 1,000 officers collecting their weekly envelope from the mob. Segment 6. How it ended by the end of the 1920s. Prohibition was a slow-motion disaster that nearly everyone could see. Crime was up. Corruption was endemic. The government was poisoning its own citizens. The courts were overwhelmed. Prisons were overflowing. And then, October 1929, the Wall Street crash. The Great Depression changed everything. Suddenly, with millions of Americans out of work, the argument for prohibition completely collapsed. If alcohol were legal again, breweries and distilleries would reopen. Hundreds of thousands of Americans would have jobs again. The government would collect billions in tax revenue from alcohol sales, money desperately needed during the Depression. Franklin D. Roosevelt ran for president in 1932 on a platform that explicitly included ending prohibition. He won in a landslide. On December 5, 1933, the 21st Amendment to the Constitution was ratified, repealing the 18th. Prohibition was over. 13 years. 10,000 dead from government-poisoned alcohol. The American Mafia, now permanent. Police corruption at a scale that took decades to partially undo. And a country that had learned, definitively, that you cannot legislate morality. The moment repeal was announced, tens of thousands of Americans poured into the streets of New York, Chicago, and every major city to celebrate. It was one of the largest spontaneous parties in American history. They had earned it, created the most powerful criminal organizations in American history, many of which still exist in some form today. It tried to improve morality. It produced the most lawless decade in American history. But look at what it accidentally created. The cocktail, because bootleg liquor tasted terrible. Bartenders invented drinks to hide the flavor. The gin and tonic, the sidecar, the bee's knees. The American cocktail culture that exists in every bar in the world today was born in a speakeasy. NASCAR.bootleggers needed fast cars to outrun federal agents. They hired mechanics to soup up their engines. Those mechanics became the first stock car racers. NASCAR was literally born from Prohibition-era bootleggers running moonshine through the mountains of North Carolina. The FBI, Before Prohibition, the Bureau of Investigation was a small, underfunded agency. The scale of organized crime created by Prohibition forced the federal government to massively expand law enforcement at the national level, eventually creating the FBI as we know it today. Jazz. The speakeasy's demand for live entertainment gave jazz music the platform it needed to reach white American audiences, breaking racial barriers that American society officially maintained. Prohibition tried to make America better. It made America interesting. Wrote a conclusion. Prohibition lasted 13 years. In those 13 years, America learned something fundamental about itself, that laws made without the consent of the governed will not be followed, that when you make something illegal, you don't eliminate it. You just hand it to criminals. That the most dangerous thing a government can do is decide it knows better than the people it serves, and act on that belief without their consent. These lessons should have changed everything. In some ways they have. In some ways, we're still learning them. The speakeasies are gone. But the story of what happened when America tried to ban a drink and accidentally built the modern world instead is one of the most American stories ever told. I'm Hidden America TV. If you could go back to the 1920s, would you visit a speakeasy? Drop your answer in the comments. I'll see you in the next hidden story.